So, reading from Zechariah chapter 13. On that day a fountain will be opened to the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, to cleanse them from sin and impurity. On that day I will banish the names of the idols from the land, and they will be remembered no more, declares the Lord Almighty. I will remove both the prophets and the spirits of impurity from the land, and if anyone still prophesies, his father and mother to whom he was born will say to him, "You must die, because you have told lies in the Lord's name." When he prophesies, his own parents will stab him. On that day every prophet will be ashamed of his prophetic vision. He will not put on a prophet's garment of hair in order to deceive. He will say, "I am not a prophet, I am a farmer. The land has been my livelihood since my youth." If someone asks him, "What are these wounds on your body?" he will answer, "The wounds I was given at the house of my friends." Awake, O sword, against my shepherd, against the man who is close to me, declares the Lord Almighty. Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered, and I will turn my hand against the little ones. In the whole land, declares the Lord, 2/3 will be struck down and perish, yet 1/3 will be left in it. This third I will bring into the fire. I will refine them like silver and test them like gold. They will call on my name, and I will answer them. I will say, "They are my people," and they will say, "The Lord is our God." We heard at the end of the last section about the fountain or the spring that flows. And what will this fountain do? It will cleanse. I guess we've all experienced the conviction of sin, that feeling of guilt inside us, and I guess we've all at one time or another tried to find ways of dealing with it and failed. Maybe we've punished ourselves, or we've tried to make up for it by working harder, or perhaps just hoping that time will be a healer. And if we're honest, we've found they've all failed. That's because we all know that really sin is an issue only God can deal with. And that's the wonderful thing about Christianity, about Jesus, about this fountain of forgiveness. It's inexhaustible, flowing from the side of Jesus. It just keeps coming and never stops. That means that if you've ever thought that you've sinned once too often, or you've done something unforgivable, then you're wrong. If you think you've done something that's so bad that it can't be forgiven, you're wrong. You know, that load of guilt that you carry can be dumped on God's forgiveness. That's how big, that's how great God's grace is. It's far bigger than our sin. But I guess, or I hope, most of us want more. Not only do we want to be forgiven, but we want to get rid of the sin. So, is there anything more specific that we can learn? Well, Zechariah chapter 13 helps us with this. We read that idols will be banished, verse 2, false prophecy will cease. Remember, these were diagnosed as the twin diseases back in chapter 10. So now, on the final day, these will finally be dealt with. The cleansing spoken of in verse 1 will not just cleanse the people, but cleanse the land. It will be a complete cleansing. It not just idolatry, but false prophecy as well. It will be completely swept away. The work will be so complete that the false prophet will have to hide. He won't be able to put on the prophet's clothing, verse 4. He will claim to be a farmer, not a prophet, verse 5. He will make excuses about the marks on his body, verse 6. They're all denials, they're all obviously false, and the false prophets will be exposed as false and then driven out from amongst God's people. And then the final bit of cleansing comes in verses 7 to 9. God will bring a sword of judgment, and this sword will strike down the shepherd. Now that should be a shock to us, since it was God who had appointed the shepherd. You see, God's plan for cleansing depends on the death of the shepherd. Here it is, Zechariah 13. His shepherd, the good shepherd. But what are the results of the shepherd being struck down? Well, first of all, the sheep will be scattered. Even the little ones, the vulnerables, will be part of it. We read 2/3 of the population will die. But there'll be a remnant who remain, 1/3, and they will be refined, they will be purified, and verse 9 will be restored to a right relationship with God. The Lord is our God. So how does this apply to us? Wasn't it incredible to think that the one who was pierced, the one from whom the cleansing flows, is a stricken shepherd? It's all brought about by God. You see, verse 7, Jesus quotes it in Mark chapter 14 on the brink of his betrayal. From Jesus' own mouth, we know that he is the shepherd spoken about here, and that the sword and the striking are referring to his death on the cross, just like the piercing, chapter 12, and the fountain, chapter 13. So God's plans all depend on Jesus' death on the cross going ahead. And here is God giving the very command that's going to bring his plan of salvation into action. Awake, O sword, against my shepherd. God actually commands it. Now, some opponents of the Christian message caricature this and say, how can it be right for God to force his son into taking our place on the cross like that? But that's a caricature, because there was no forcing. Jesus himself said it, with this part of Zechariah in mind. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. Sure, it's an unthinkable idea. Even Peter struggled with the idea back in Mark chapter 8. But the use of the sword makes it clear that Jesus was willing in all of this. Remember Matthew chapter 10. So as the Father raised the sword, so the Son, the Good Shepherd, willingly laid down his life. What did this bring about? It brought about for us the opening of the fountain for cleansing. Again, that's an image that's picked up by Revelation chapter 7, where the multitude have their robes washed. Remember the words of William Cowper, there is a fountain filled with blood, drawn from Emmanuel's veins, and sinners plunged beneath that flood lose all their guilty stain. And what else happens? Verse 9. They're going to be refined like silver, tested like gold. That's sin. that we struggle with, that yes, we're forgiven from, but it's still somewhere inside us. As the shepherd lays down his life, as the shepherd is struck for us, so we are refined. The remnant, the sheep are scattered. We are refined, and a remnant emerged, cleansed, purged, and refined. And it was all God's plan. It's God's plan for you and for me to free us from that guilt that we carry with us. So you know that heavy burden you bear? Because of Zechariah 13, God has dealt with it. That burden that you carry with you, because of Zechariah 13, God dealt with it as the shepherd was struck down, as the good shepherd laid down his life for the sheep.